There's another fire. Reactor 4 is burning, and some reports say the flames are in the worst possible area, the outer layer of the vessel's containment wall. It's still unconfirmed, but if it's true, that's where the spent fuel is stored. Now stay with me because I need to explain. Reactor 4 could be a time bomb. Last night I asked our nuclear expert Jim Walsh of MIT his greatest fear. Walsh said it was the spent fuel, the atomic waste, which lies relatively unprotected in cooling pools inside the reactor buildings. 50 workers, folks. They are standing alone against catastrophe. Jim Walsh of MIT is back with us tonight. Jim, is your worst fear being realized right now?
Well, the worst fear would be if that material melts down or catches fire, that material itself catches fire and rises up into the atmosphere. We're not there yet, but we are one step away from that. And I think even more troubling, the International Atomic Energy Agency says it's not just reactor 4, but reactor 5 and 6, which we haven't talked about at all during the last 4 days, is having problems with their spent fuel. And you just don't know what's going on here. You'd think, well, last night's fire, that was a one-off, freakish things happen, stuff happens, but to have it twice in 24 hours, it probably points to some underlying problem, and unless that's addressed, then it could repeat.
Okay, Jim, just so it's clear to folks who've been paying attention to this and trying to figure out, wait a minute, we've only been hearing for the first couple days about reactors 1, 2, and 3. Suddenly, where 4, 5, and 6 coming from? The reality is there are actually 6 reactors at this facility, but 4, 5, and 6 were offline, which means they weren't generating power. Only 1, 2, and 3 were. So they were the ones that were the initial point of disaster and concern. So how are 4, 5, and 6 getting into this picture now?
Well, here's the rub, Elliot. They had been shut down prior to the earthquake and the tsunami, but in being shut down, they removed the fuel rods from those reactors and put them in this temporary storage area. So these are relatively hot waste rods that are generating a lot of radiation, and they need to be cooled. And what's happened, apparently, is either a failure in the water pumps or some other problem such that the water level may be declining or the water may be boiling off, which would put them at risk for disaster. And it may be, and we do not know. We simply do not know. The company hasn't told us that it may be this increasing level of heat in that facility that is helping to contribute to these fires being ignited.
And let me come back, Jim, to the point we were discussing last night. The reason these spent fuel storage chambers or pools are so much more dangerous is because if they lose water and you get this, then the rods come together and begin to catch on fire, the radiation goes straight up, arguably, into the atmosphere. There is no containment vessel around the spent fuel pools. Is that correct?
That is 100% absolutely correct. I mean, the sort of thing we're hanging our hat on reactors 1, 2, and 3 is, yes, there's a partial meltdown. Yes, there are problems. But thank God at least there's a containment vessel, 3 feet of concrete and steel that might contain the radiation in case the worst thing happens. Well, that does not exist for the spent fuel pods.
And now, correct me if I'm wrong here, the thing that made Chernobyl the sort of disaster of all disasters is that there was not any containment vessel around the reactor there, remarkable as that was. And so when that thing blew up, the radiation went straight into the atmosphere. If we get that sort of fire and cataclysm in these spent fuel chambers, the same sort of thing could happen because there is no chamber that surrounds and protects them. And so that's the great fear everybody's got right now.
In principle, that's exactly right. I mean, what we were hoping for reactors 1, 2, and 3, what we're going for now is 3 Mile Island, that there's a partial meltdown, but that it's contained. And what we're looking at here with reactor 4, potentially 5 and 6, is a situation which is closer to Chernobyl. Now, it's not an exact comparison because there were explosions at Chernobyl that helped thrust that radioactive debris high into the atmosphere. There's no guarantee that that would happen in this case. But again, if there's a fire, it's going to get distributed. So the bottom line, Elliot, yes, that's right.
So you're telling me our upside is 3 Mile Island. This is not good news. Now, let's get back to the mechanics of what's going on here. What they're really trying to do, and, crazy as it sounds, water is the key ingredient here. They're trying to get enough water, not only to put out this fire, but to keep these rods cool. And whether these 50 people can get enough water into those containment, those pools with the spent rods and put out the fires is a Herculean task. And that's the question we simply don't have an answer to.
Even as she heads home from Tunisia, Wolf is traveling with her right now. I'm Candy Crowley. You're in the Situation Room. It is 6 a.m. Friday in Japan. Nuclear experts say the new attempt to douse an overheated reactor has been somewhat effective. Helicopters, fire trucks, and police water cannon all have been deployed to try to cool down reactor number 3. We're told radiation levels dipped, but they are still high, so the frantic work to prevent a full-scale nuclear meltdown goes on. CNN's Anna Corin is in Tokyo with more on this breaking story. Anna, just bring us up to date on the very latest of those plans.
Well, Candy, it is entering the 7th day of this crisis, and workers, probably about 300 workers we are hearing, are now at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant trying to bring this situation under control. We saw those pictures of the helicopters, the water cannons and fire trucks trying to spray water onto the reactors. Those crews had to get out because of radiation levels increasing, but they will continue those attempts today. We also know that TEPCO, the power company that owns this plant, they're also trying to reconnect the power so as to trigger the emergency cooling system. This is their number one priority, trying to cool these reactors. And as you mentioned, number 3 reactor is their major concern. Candy.
And tell us about the state of the city right now where you are, because from over here, it just looks so close to Armageddon. And I'm wondering whether we are seeing it and it's a sort of it looks overheated to us. How is it being handled there?
Well, it's funny, Candy. We spoke to a number of people yesterday, foreigners as well as Japanese. We went to the Immigration Bureau here in Tokyo, where foreigners, tens of thousands of foreigners lined up to get their re-entry permits. Now, these are people who live and work in Japan, and that permit allows them to leave and return. These people were saying, we need to have this permit in case it blows up. There were students there who said, we've been monitoring the situation for the last week. We're not getting enough information from the Japanese. Therefore, who can get their families out, they are doing that. For the Japanese, they don't have anywhere else to go. This is their home. So, I think that we can't be alarmist about this. I think we need to be concerned. We need to monitor the situation. But overall, I think that everyone thoroughly needs to take a breath and just allow these workers, allow the international community to do their job. And obviously, we all hope that this situation can be contained.
Anna Corin in Tokyo for us tonight. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. President Obama says the United States is doing all it can to help Japan, and he's trying to ease fears that Americans are in danger there or here at home. He spoke a short while ago at the White House.
We do have a responsibility to take prudent and precautionary measures to educate those Americans who may be endangered by exposure to radiation if the situation deteriorates. That's why last night I authorized the voluntary departures of family members and dependents of U.S. officials working in northeastern Japan. All U.S. citizens in Japan should continue to carefully monitor the situation and follow the guidance of the U.S. and Japanese governments. And those who are seeking assistance should contact our embassy and consulates, which continue to be open and operational. Second, I know that many Americans are also worried about the potential risks to the United States. So I want to be very clear. We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the United States, whether it's the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific. Let me repeat that. We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific. That is the judgment of our Nuclear Regulatory Commission and many other experts.
The scope of Japan's nuclear disaster could change in an instant with a big shift in the winds. CNN meteorologist Chad Myers is keeping tabs on the weather in the disaster zone. Let me just ask you first, Chad. We just heard the president saying that, in fact, no U.S. territory is in danger, and neither is the U.S. coastline. Is there another place other than Japan that is in danger given the prevailing winds?
Given the prevailing winds now, no, because of the way the winds will disperse the radiation. Plus, by the time it makes landfall anywhere, 3 or 4 days, even for Russia, that most of the radiation the isotopes would have degraded to something non-radiational. They'd just be things flying around the atmosphere. I want to take you to a couple of things, Candy. We'll step back a little bit. This is a model that will show you where the wind will go. Take you right here. We'll step back a little bit. This is a model that will show you where the wind will go. Take you right here to where the wind has been. And in fact, the wind blowing off the country, off the shore of Japan, affected the water drops. I was watching the water drops live here from an NHK feed, and the wind was literally blowing that water that they were trying to put on this little reactor, just blowing it in the wind. And that was the wind that we saw last night, and we still see on this satellite picture now. That wind will change, and it will change from offshore to very close to deep from the south to the north, and that would move this radiation plume. We know there is one, it's just not big enough to make it to the U.S. It could move it up towards Sunday in the next couple of days. The winds will not be offshore anymore by Saturday. They will be pointing at the northern part of the island of Honshu. Now back to this graphic, because there was a lot of cutting and pasting going on today about a graphic that made its way around the internet about how this plume of radiation was going to make its way to California tonight and tomorrow. That was a theoretical model that was put out just for informational purposes about a plume that didn't even exist. And that's what the text said. But if you just cut and pasted the picture, everybody freaked out because it looked like a bunch of radiation was coming to the U.S. today. That didn't happen, and it's not going to happen. Even if some radiation was immediately emitted right now, it would work its way through the Aleutian Islands, back up toward Russia, and then probably up toward the Pacific Northwest. By the time, 5 days later, by the time it would even get close to any U.S. landfall, all the radiation would literally be dispersed. Candy?
So as I understand what you're saying, Chad, the president's perfectly right that there's no reason to believe any U.S. territory, much less the U.S. coastline, is threatened by anything that might come our way. But the city of Sendai, if the winds switch, gets hit with yet another disaster.
No question about that is the possibility coming up for Friday and Saturday for that city. 1 million people in that city. I know we talk about how much damage and destruction was done by the tsunami. Not the city of Sendai. Sendai is just fine. 1 million people there, the big skyscrapers there. The coastline to the east of that city, that's what was devastated by the tsunami. The people are still living in Sendai. If the wind shifts and that radiation goes there may be a completely new evacuation plan for that city, or at least an evacuation in place. Stay inside your house, don't go out at all. And that's outside that barrier, outside that window, that radius that they've drawn right now.
Chad Myers at the CNN Weather Center.
No, the president has authorized the departure of Americans, and that's the decision that was made based on all the evidence that we had before the day ended in Washington yesterday. But there will be a continuing evaluation. This is, as I told you, literally a minute-by-minute analysis, and we're doing everything we can to support the Japanese and their heroic efforts in dealing with this unfolding disaster.
This must weigh heavily on you, even on a trip like this.
It does, Wolf. I mean, this is a very serious problem with widespread ramifications, and first and foremost, we want to help the Japanese, our great ally, deal with this and limit the damage to the health and safety of the Japanese people, but our primary responsibility always is to the health and safety of Americans, and so we're working toward both of those goals.
Certainly what's happening in Japan is very much on her mind. She's aware of what's going on. She's reading all the information.
He was a site manager during the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident here in the United States. Thank you so much for joining us on this. Let me ask you, at the start of this show, we had one of our reporters there say that there was a feeling among the Japanese, at least, that this nuclear threat was being hyped on the outside, that there was more reason for calm than for what seems to be kind of a worldwide induced panic. From what you know, looking at this, are the Japanese underestimating the threat, or are we overestimating the threat?
I think Japanese people have it exactly right.
You think there is less to this than what we're saying, and how so?
From what I've seen in the American press and some of the Western press, I think it's being way overplayed. This is a very serious matter. Don't get that wrong. But I mean, some of the pictures that you see where the headline says nuclear catastrophe, and then there's pictures of body bags and people in mass, it has nothing to do with the nuclear thing at all. So the average watcher of this might get the wrong impression that these are nuclear deaths. It's not that situation at all.
So where are we now in the threat? I mean, tell us as much as you can tell. Obviously, you're not there, but is it? It is dangerous, clearly.
It is serious, very serious situation. It is very dangerous there in the plant. The workers are working very, very hard to control 3 semi-melted reactors down, that control 3 reactors that have been damaged very severely and partially melted. Fuel pools, so they are working very hard to control the situation, but there is no need for a widespread fear or a help from a long distance.
But yet we're seeing, and our viewers are seeing, these pictures of an incredibly damaged plant, and it's hard not to think that radiation isn't just spewing out. Is that a possibility, that it would just be an uncontrolled release at some point, or do you not see that happening?
Well, this is an industrial disaster of the first order. I mean, the buildings are wrecked, they've had hydrogen explosions, so this is a very serious matter, and there is radioactivity being released from the plant right now. But the levels off-site are not such that it is an immediate health concern for the widespread area. I mean, the local people have been evacuated, and that is appropriate for this time. The people are working to bring it under better control than they have it now. So yes, material is leaving. Yes, you can see it with very sophisticated instrumentation, but it is not a major health risk outside the evacuation zone.
And so tell me why for the U.S. that evacuation zone is 50 miles, where it is, I think, 12 miles for the Japanese. What accounts for that difference? Overcautiousness?
Well, my view, I believe so. When you make a decision, when the government makes a decision for its people, it's trying to do the best thing. And you have a nuclear risk of something happening that's a very low probability, where a very large release could come out, and you have to compare this radiation against what it takes to move people. To move people 50 miles, a large population 50 miles, is a huge, huge endeavor. And I personally think that's beyond what's necessary at this point, but I'm not in a position, I don't have all the information. But as a nuclear engineer who went through this at 3 Mile Island, I think we're being overcautious.
Before I ask you about safety measures in our own nuclear plants here, what is the worst case scenario that you can envision? Is that a complete meltdown? And then what's the threat?
I think we're past the worst time. I think as time is on your side because the heat levels are dropping. When the fuel, some of the cladding oxidized, was an exothermic reaction. That is past at this point. So I think if the workers can get some of these electrical cables in, some of the cooling pumps running, which they're working very hard to do, I think we're going to be on the downside of this. Now, there's still going to be burps and there's still going to be lots of news about this for a long, long time. But I don't see the worst time, I think, is past us.
So from what I understand, what happened here, I mean, you obviously have an earthquake, you have a tsunami, and so there's electrical outlets fuel the cooling, and then the backup is a generator, and then after that, the backup is battery. President Obama is trying to reassure Americans worried about the impact of Japan's nuclear crisis unfolding more than 5,000 miles from the U.S. West Coast.
We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the United States, whether it's the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific. Let me repeat that. We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific. And going forward, we will continue to keep the American people fully updated, because I believe that you must know what I know as president.
We want to bring in CNN's Ted Rollins in Los Angeles. Ted, those look like real reassuring words. How are they taken out there?
Well, I'll tell you, Candy, the president's talking about it. Experts have been talking about this since Japan broke out and since these reactors had trouble in Japan. And basically the theme here universally has been there is no problem for people living in the United States here on the West Coast. Still, despite the fact that all these experts are saying this and the politicians are saying this, people here are convinced that they are in danger. Fears over radiation from Japan somehow making it to the United States has people, especially on the West Coast, clearing out supplies of potassium iodide, which protects the thyroid from radiation.
I'm trying to find it and finding it difficult.
At Fleming Pharmaceuticals in Fenton, Missouri, they've doubled production but still can't make enough potassium iodide. And Candy, here in California, state officials just had a conference call with members of the media urging the media to get the word out that at this point, unless something dramatically changes, there is no problem for folks living in California or anywhere on the West Coast in terms of radiation coming from Japan.
It reminds me a little bit of when the avian bird flu scare, when everyone went out and they ran out of Tamiflu for a little while. And this seems to be along the same lines.
And, one thing that, one person said to me, well, it's not that expensive. Why not just get it anyway, just in case? So I think maybe a lot of people aren't genuinely scared and running to the drugstores, but they're thinking, hey, for a couple bucks, why not put it in my medicine cabinet?
Exactly.
That's a little bit of, I think, what's going on.
I think so, too. Thanks, Ted Rollins. I appreciate it. The crews at the scene of Japan's nuclear crisis are being exposed to high levels of radiation. Is it really a potential suicide mission? We have an expert in radiation medicine standing by. Plus, Anderson Cooper live in Tokyo for us with the latest on the nuclear crisis
When does the lying stop? If Japan has nothing to hide, why are they hiding in Japan? Why does Japan not even exist anymore? Why is it that I can show you endless lies of endless lies, just endless, lie, non-stop. That's their legacy. It's never told the truth once, not a single time. Not one freaking time have they told us the truth. Fabrication, misdirections, misrepresentation, and outrageous, deadly, vicious lies.
Charlie?
Yes?
Name one bad thing you've done.
Well, I've done bad things. But let's talk about you for a second. Tell me one bad thing that you've done. You better be evil.
How evil?
Really evil. Like so evil that you would say it was evil. Like it's the fruits of the devil. Evil.
Plumes from Japan will reach the U.S. West Coast tomorrow have alarmed many Americans. Chad Myers is with us now. So, Chad, experts are telling us that there is no cause for alarm or panic, right?
Well, yeah, that's correct. And you want to know why?
Tell us why.
Because all of the graphics and all the animations you've been seeing in other places online that show this plume of radiation reaching the West Coast is part of a computer model that was run this week for a plume of radiation that escaped from Japan on Saturday. The only problem is there wasn't a plume. So all of this talk about this plume is coming to the United States is all debunked because there is no plume.
50 becquerels in your food. Japan is serving at 500 in your fucking meals. Before Fukushima, 100 becquerels, cesium nuclear waste. Like they will like pick up 30 million bags, make fake fucking walls. They'll do anything but deal with the problem.
It's obviously a problem. Japan, it's way worse than originally thought. This is a wormwood moment. But I'm telling you, the poison is here.